Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to see so many of you here today for the launch of Unseen's 2024 Helpline Annual Assessment. The Helpline is in its 10th year of operation, and each year we produce one of the most comprehensive reports on modern slavery. But what we've got to remember today is that we're talking about statistics, and behind every stat, behind every number, we're talking about individuals and people who need to recover from their ordeal, rebuild their lives and regain their independence and their identity. And we mustn't forget the political and economic landscapes within which we're working. So I'm really delighted that we have a packed agenda again today. We have an introductory message from Jess Phillips, who is the Minister responsible for safeguarding and violence against women and girls. I'll then give a very high-level overview of 2024, and then I will move into the 2024 data and typologies, which will be run by my colleague Natasha Mitra, who is the Head of Helpline Services here at the charity. And then we will have guest speaker, Chief Constable Sarah Crew. And as I said, a chance at the end for any Q&A that you might have. So without further ado, we will move into the video from Minister for Safeguarding Violence Against Women and Girls, Jess Phillips.
Hello all, and thank you to Unseen for inviting me to open the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline annual webinar. I know from personal experience how independent helplines, such as the Modern Slavery Helpline, are crucial for providing information, advice and guidance for victims and survivors. They provide a safe space at the most desperate times where individuals can seek support without fear of judgment. These services are hugely important, and I thank those who are working tirelessly day in, day out to provide victims and survivors with the help they need. I have seen firsthand the impact that modern slavery has on individuals and communities. I am clear that our approach must place the experts at its heart. These are the survivors, and those organisations such as Unseen who work to identify, refer and support survivors. Last month marked the 10-year anniversary of the passing of the Modern Slavery Act. The Act was a truly momentous milestone at the time and resulted in significant improvements in our response. Both at home and internationally, the legislation introduced was seen as groundbreaking, with the UK viewed as a leading, credible voice in driving forward much-needed change. This is where I want us to be again, at the forefront of driving forward change in this area and leading by example. We have already taken decisive steps to tackle these heinous crimes. We know that those referred to the National Referral Mechanism wait far too long for a conclusive grounds decision. I appreciate some people here today may have experienced this firsthand. I know this wait can be hugely detrimental to the well-being and recovery of survivors. I am clear that tackling this backlog is a priority. In a few short months, we've hired just over 100 new staff to support on clearing the backlog. As of last month, it's now half the size than at its worst in 2022. So we're well on track, but we will not stop until we have eradicated the backlog completely. And during Anti-Slavery Week in October of last year, I made clear my commitment to deliver a modern slavery action plan. I am pleased that the action plan has now been developed and shared with our key partners. It sets out my ambition for tackling modern slavery in the coming years, as well as my commitment to long-term reform, including reforming the identification system. We know that it must change to better serve the needs of victims and survivors. That's why I'm really pleased to share that we hope to launch a consultation before the summer. This will allow us to gather views and collate evidence on how we can reform the system. We are working to ensure that we gather a wide range of responses to the consultation, including from survivors. The challenges ahead are significant, but by uniting our efforts, we can make real progress in eradicating modern slavery. Together, we can and must make the UK a place where modern slavery has no foothold.
So now we will move into the high-level statistics. So just to say, my name is Justine Carter. I'm a director here at Unseen. I've been here 9 years, virtually to the day, and I was one of the instigators setting up the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. So I'm really delighted that we've got to its 10th year of operation and really seeing the benefits that the operation is bringing. So just to recap really on the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, the helpline is a UK-wide service, but it also can take international calls, and we remain confidential and independent, and it makes us more accessible to those who feel able to engage with statutory agencies, quite often because of their immigration status or if they've been involved in criminality. We are available 365 days a year and have access to over 250 languages with interpreters. Our specialist staff are fully trained to ready to accept calls from potential victims themselves, businesses perhaps wanting to tackle issues in their supply chains, members of the public that might be concerned about something they've seen, and professionals including statutory agencies like the NHS staff and solicitors. And we are trauma informed and person centred. So if there is an adult who's not at immediate risk of harm, we go at their pace and we're led by what they want in terms of action. We have a really collaborative approach. So we have lots of partner agencies that we refer to and work alongside, and we add more every year that we're in operation. And we're contactable in lots of different ways. So we have our free phone number, but we're also contactable through our online web form, which you can find at modernslaveryhelpline.org. And we also have the Unseen app, which has been great for frontline professionals. It contains lots of information about MS indicators, legislation, and a contact form. And the front page is translatable into a range of languages and can be used to signpost to us. Finally, data. We capture a lot of data and we have a large and unique data set. And that differs from the national referral mechanism statistics and arguably is more accurate because we're independent and we can talk to people who just aren't interacting with statutory agencies and first responders. So if we move on to looking at the data model very quickly, we gather data on lots of different instances and lots of different situations, but we mainly gather data on the type of exploitation that's being indicated, the sector where exploitation has occurred, the geographical locations, and the type of location. And we also collect demographic information on the potential victims and exploiters. And we look at their interaction with the case. So what's the relationship between the victim and the exploiter? How were they recruited and controlled? And what are we also interested in is their relationship to the situation. We also record information on our activities. So how many calls or web forms, app submissions that we might receive on a particular case, and how many signposts and referrals that we might make. And of course, we also record case notes, which gives us a real in-depth understanding of the situation at hand. So our data model is fairly dynamic and flexible, and it allows us to amend the model over time and to reflect on growing trends. And it's also complex, recognising the various complexities of the modern slavery situations and other interrelated crimes that we receive information on. But then we look at the high level numbers for 2024, which give you an idea of the scale of our work. In 2024, we received nearly 11,500 incoming calls, web forms, and app submissions. And that's fairly consistent with what we saw in the year previous. We indicated more than 2,000 cases of modern slavery, and that was involving almost 5,000 potential victims. More than 3,500 potential exploiters were also indicated, and in total we made over 10,500 referrals or signposts to other agencies and organisations, and that's generally around 1,500 more than the previous year. And we know that modern slavery can impact anyone. and we hear from a wide range of nationalities. In 2024, 94 different potential victim nationalities were indicated. And although that's down slightly from what we saw in the previous year, it just shows you the complexity of the different types of individuals and the different types of situations that we're involved with. So moving on to referrals and signposts, we clearly don't work in isolation. We make lots of referrals to law enforcement, to lots of government agencies and non-governmental organisations, as well as signposting to other organisations as we deem appropriate. And we always work with the individual on the call to establish what the best course of action is for them. In 2024, we implemented new referral pathways with the likes of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network, Hibiscus, A21, Migrant Help, and the Bristol Modern Slavery Operational Partnership. Overall, when we look at cases, modern slavery, labour abuse, and non-modern slavery, we submitted nearly 1,600 referrals and made nearly 9,000 signposts. In relation to modern slavery alone, we submitted 1,037 referrals, of which nearly 3/4, that's around 74%, were to law enforcement. So that's the police or the National Crime Agency. We refer to police to share information that may aid investigation, as well as advocating for them to act as first responder to enter someone into the national referral mechanism to get additional help and support. But the biggest recipient of our referrals was to the Metropolitan Police. And that's normally a prevalent referral route for us, largely if you think about the population of London, which is driving quite a lot of that. The second is UK visas and immigration, but we only refer to UKVI and their capacity as a first responder for survivors in Home Office accommodation or with a pending asylum claim. And the third highest is HMRC. These tend to again be for labour abuse cases where there are issues around non-compliance with national minimum wage. And then, as you can see, we have referrals to the National Crime Agency, the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, and the remaining four are police forces, the West Midlands, West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and Thames Valley. And again, that's consistent with large populations and metropolitan areas where we see a higher prevalence of calls, contacts coming into the helpline. And then thinking about modern slavery cases in the UK. The majority of cases reported to the helpline relate to situations of exploitation taking place here in the UK. Where the country of exploitation was known, 86% of those were in the UK. So that's just over 1,300. And most of these, as you can see, are in England. That's 1,030 cases. Much smaller numbers are indicated in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland with 41, 28 and 7 respectively. There were also 199 cases where exploitation was taking place in the UK, but a specific country was not reported or not recorded. And so in those instances, we don't make assumptions. Where country of exploitation was known, there were also 210 cases where the exploitation reportedly took place overseas. So it's just important to recognise those cases and recognise the importance of those in these statistics. Finally, in terms of types of modern slavery, again, what we've seen over the recent years is that the most common type that we see is labour exploitation, with more than 2,500 potential victims indicated in 2024. Where the exploitation type was known, labour exploitation was reported in relation to almost 2/3 of potential victims. These are situations within business supply chains. Our business services team use Helpline Insights to help their business clients to tackle issues, and that's both in their own organisations but through their supply chains, and ensure that best practice is implemented to prevent exploitation. Sexual exploitation is the second most common form of modern slavery that we see on the helpline. And that in 2024 indicated 804 potential victims. And these are situations where people are forced to provide sexual services. 261 potential victims were indicated in criminal exploitation. And quite often these are situations involving drugs such as county lines, cannabis cultivation, cuckooing, but also people forced into committing other crimes such as theft or fraud. Domestic servitude is also characterised by someone often living in a household with their exploiters and forced to undertake domestic work such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for children or the elderly. 116 potential victims of domestic servitude were indicated in 24, and 63 potential victims were indicated in other forms of modern slavery. There were also 285 potential victims that experienced various or multiple types of exploitation. One situation was involving forced surrogacy and another involving organ harvesting alongside another form of exploitation. So we can see that we are still getting the whole gambit of different types of exploitation and really getting beneath and understanding more about the situations that are reported to us. So that's covering the high-level overview. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Natasha Mitra, who will go into more detail around the trends that we've seen in 2024. Over to you, Tash.
Thank you, Justine. So, demographic information of potential victims and exploiters gives us a really clear understanding of who's at risk and where prevention efforts need to be focused. What status was known, the mid shy of 90%, and 11% were reportedly minors. Historically, we've seen more male than females have been indicated to the helpline each year since we opened, with that gender gap narrowing each year. In 2024, for the first time, more female potential victims were indicated to males, with 53% reportedly female where we knew the gender. Just over 1,300 males were also indicated, 5 trans females and 1 gender non-conforming individual as well. Justine mentioned 94 different potential victim nationalities were indicated overall in 2024. Indian nationals were the most prevalent for the second year. So we see a lot of Indians in labour exploitation in the care sector. Chinese nationals have now become the second most prevalent, following a 67% increase from the year before. We had reports of many Chinese nationals in sexual exploitation as well as exploited for labour in a range of sectors. Vietnamese potential victims were third most prevalent, but also featured in the top 5 nationalities in sexual exploitation and labour exploitation, and was also the most indicated nationality in criminal exploitation. Vietnamese was also the most indicated amongst minors. Zimbabwe, a bit of an increase there as well, 18%. Also a prominent nationality in labour exploitation in the care sector. Since the helpline was founded in 2016 all the way through until 2022, Romanian was the most indicated potential victim nationality until India overtook in 2023. So in 2024, reports of Romanian nationals have dropped significantly by 61% after a 35% drop last year. So we see Romanian nationals indicated across quite a wide range of exploitation types, but particularly labour exploitation, so quite a lot of car washes and construction, and sexual exploitation. Albanian potential victims have almost halved. Again, this is a one that we see historically, very prevalent nationality, but it's now dropped down to 6th. This drop in both Albanian and Romanian nationals may be due to growing stigma from government and law enforcement relating to these nationalities. Albanian nationals particularly have been highly targeted for removal from the UK, as well as there being campaigns to deter people from coming to the UK, which may have impacted these figures. Bulgarian nationals have featured in the top 10 for the first time since 2020, following an enormous increase of 575% from only 8 reported in 2023. And we've seen Bulgarians exploited in the construction industry particularly. So fewer potential exploiters than victims were indicated, so just over 3,500, which equates to approximately 1.4 potential victims for every one potential exploiter that's indicated. So as to be expected, where age status was known, almost all were adults. However, there were 6 that were reportedly minors, which is twice the number indicated the previous year. Of those 6, where we knew the specific age bracket, they were aged 16 to 17. Half of those cases with minor exploiters related to criminal exploitation and the other half labour exploitation. So looking at all potential exploiters, where we knew the age bracket, the most common was 30 to 39-year-olds, which is slightly older than the most common age of potential victims, which is 20 to 29. As well as being the first year that we've seen more female than male potential victims, we also recorded the highest number of female exploiters since the helpline opened, so 389. So the majority were male, but where gender was known, 24% of potential exploiters were female. So female exploiters were across a few different exploitation types, with the highest numbers in labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, and domestic servitude. And there were a higher number of female than male exploiters recorded in situations of financial exploitation. We see less fluctuation of potential exploiter nationalities than we do with victims. So Libyan nationals have featured in the top 10 for a long time, and in 2024 reached number 1, and that comprises 16% of exploiters where we knew the nationality. So there was a notable drop in Libyan exploiters in 2023, but it's come back up again with a 92% increase. So in these cases, the exploitation hasn't taken place in the UK, but it's been reported by potential victims who have now sought asylum in the UK. So they tend to have fled from conflict zones into Libya and then been exploited for labour by militia. Despite a decrease of 21%, we're still seeing high numbers of Albanian potential exploiters, which is quite interesting considering the sizable decrease in Albanian potential victims. And similarly, the number of Chinese potential victims has also decreased by 37%, in contrast to the number of potential victims going up. You will also notice that many of the top exploiter nationalities in this list also feature in the top 10 potential victim nationalities list. So we have more labour exploitation reported than any other type of modern slavery. There were 686 cases involving more than 2,500 potential victims. So where exploitation type was known, that equates to almost half of modern slavery cases and 63% of potential victims, which is a higher proportion than the year before. So where gender was known, 30% of those in labour exploitation were female. Where age status was known, 4% were minors. And for the third year, Indians are the most commonly indicated nationality in labour exploitation due to widespread exploitation in the care sector. So where nationality was known, 23% of labour exploitation potential victims were Indian. So this is a comparison of the top 10 nationalities in labour exploitation in 2024 compared with the year before. So as I mentioned, Indian nationals top the list in labour exploitation, as well as being the most prominent overall. So 88% of Indian nationals indicated to the helpline in 2024 overall were in labour exploitation. Romanian nationals still in the top 10, but numbers have decreased considerably. So we see Romanians often in car washes and construction. Zimbabwe nationals have moved up to 2nd, whilst Nigeria has dropped down to 10th, which is interesting because they're both very prevalent within the care sector. Vietnam has remained quite consistent, prevalent nationality in nail bar cases. And we have Bulgaria, Bangladesh, UAE and Afghanistan, which are new to the top 10. Libya, UK and India are the top 3 exploiter nationalities in labour exploitation. So only Indian there that also features in the potential victim list. So job offers and advertisements continue to be the most common way people are recruited into labour exploitation. So they apply for a seemingly legitimate job, but then the reality is quite different. So 44% were recruited that way. So false promises and statements as well as abduction were also common. Once in exploitation, 61% were financially controlled, keeping them trapped in the situation. So that could be withheld wages, deductions from salaries, debt bondage. Confinement or restricted movement, as well as tied accommodation, were also common. So tied accommodations where people are living on site or in accommodation provided by their employer. The care sector was the most indicated sector for the second year. So 107 cases involving almost 600 potential victims. We saw a sizable drop in case and potential victim numbers, so 36% decrease in potential victims. And that was likely resulting from the legislative change that came in March of 2024, meaning that migrant care workers could no longer bring dependents to the UK. But despite that drop, care workers make up nearly a quarter of potential victims in labour exploitation. Construction is now the second most common industry for labour exploitation, with 105 cases and just under 500 potential victims. So it's only two less cases than the care sector, but around 100 victims less. The service industry, which includes car washes and nail bars, prior to 2023, it was the most commonly indicated sector. It's now third, following a 41% drop in potential victims, but again, 102 cases and just over 300 potential victims. So in terms of cases, not far behind these other two sectors. Moving on to sexual exploitation. So these cases comprise about a quarter of all the modern slavery cases indicated to us. So 373 situations involving 804 potential victims of sexual exploitation. Where age status was known, almost a quarter of potential victims of sexual exploitation were minors, so 110 minors. Reports of minors in sexual exploitation more than doubled, so there's a 108% increase. Overall, the most common age bracket for people in sexual exploitation was 20 to 29-year-olds. Where we had information about gender, 95% of sexual exploitation victims were female. However, in 2024, we saw an all-time high of males in this form of modern slavery. So it's small numbers, but 29 males, which is up from 19, so it's a 53% increase. Earlier, I mentioned that there was one gender non-conforming person and 5 transgender females that were indicated to the helpline in total in 2024. All bar one of them was in sexual exploitation. The most prominent potential victim nationality in sexual exploitation was Chinese. So this changes yearly. In 2023, it was Brazilian. In 2022, it was Thai. In 2024, where we knew the nationality, almost a quarter were Chinese. Brazil continues to be prominent. It's the second most common, followed by equal numbers from Romania and Vietnam. Chinese is also the most indicated potential exploiter nationality, followed by Romanian and Albanian. False promises or statements were the most common way people recruited into sexual exploitation, and that was reported in relation to 27% potential victims. Grooming was also really common, as were job offers and advertisements. We record sexual abuse as a control method in all sexual exploitation cases, but beyond that, the next most common was confinement and restricted movement, and that was recorded in relation to 57%. Financial control was also very common. We saw a 32% drop in potential victims of criminal exploitation to 261, which makes up 6% of all potential victims indicated to the helpline. Where we knew the age status, 21% of potential victims were reportedly minors, which is an increase on the year before. It's a high proportion and not far behind sexual exploitation, where it's 24%. The most common age bracket, similarly to other forms of modern slavery, was 20 to 29-year-olds. Where gender was known, 73% were male, which is much higher than the year before, 65%. The most common nationality indicated here was Vietnamese, moving up from third the year before. So where nationality was known, 22% of potential victims were Vietnamese. Albanian nationals were the most prevalent last year and now are the second most common, followed by UK nationals. Filipino nationals were the second most indicated in 2023, following no reports the year before, but in 2024 don't feature at all in the top 10. When we looked at potential exploiters, this has remained consistent with the year before. So Albania, again, topping the list, comprising 45% where we knew the nationality. And that's followed by the UK and Pakistan, which comprise 13 and 9% respectively. The most indicated recruitment tactic in criminal exploitation was through coercion, so things like threats and blackmail, and that was indicated in relation to a quarter of potential victims. Other common recruitment tactics were grooming and abduction. So these are quite different from the year before, when the most common was through job offers or advertisements, which has seemingly dropped off. So to keep people in criminal exploitation, the most indicated control method was confinement or restrictive movement, and that was indicated in relation to 80% of potential victims. Financial control and monitoring were also recorded frequently. 71% of cases and just shy of 60% of potential victims were involved in a situation relating to the drug trade. So these could be county line situations, cuckooing, cannabis cultivation. And this is seen to an even greater extent when we look at minors, where 71% were involved in drug-related situations. We've seen a noticeable decline in forced begging and shoplifting cases. And forced scamming, which was first indicated in 2022, is still reported infrequently in small numbers, but they have increased. They've increased each year, and there were 6 cases in 2024. So those are situations where individuals are being forced into instigating scams, usually online, to fraudulently acquire money for an exploiter. Domestic servitude is a form of modern slavery that is reported less frequently than other forms, so it's very hidden. In 2024, 100 cases involving 116 potential victims were reported. So this makes up 3% of all potential victims indicated. So the majority were reportedly adults, with only 7% of domestic servitude victims indicated as minors, where we knew the age status. Overall, the most indicated age bracket was 30 to 39, which is an older group than most other exploitation types, where the most common age group is 20 to 29. Where gender was known, 92% of potential victims were indicated as female, which is an increase from the year before, it was only 84. Filipino nationals have been the most indicated in domestic servitude for the second year, with numbers increasing by a third. When we look at all forms of modern slavery, Filipino nationals were only recorded 24 times throughout the year, but they were disproportionately indicated in domestic servitude, where half of them were indicated. The second and third most recorded nationalities for this type of exploitation were Nigerian and Indian. In terms of exploiter nationality, the highest numbers were recorded from Oman, followed by Nigeria and the UK. The most common way people are recruited into this form of slavery was through a job offer or advertisement. That was reported in relation to 35%. Other common tactics were false promises or statements and through intimate partner or marriage propositions. In terms of control methods, tied accommodation continues to be the most indicated. So that's reported in relation to 86% where we knew the control methods. So most situations of domestic servitude involve someone living and working within a family home. Other common control methods were confinement or restricted movement and financial control. So 325 children were indicated in modern slavery in 2024. So where the age status was known, that equates to 11% of all potential victims. So children were indicated in 9% of all cases. The highest proportion of child victims was recorded in sexual exploitation. So where we knew the age status, 24% of potential victims were minors. Numbers of minors in sexual exploitation more than doubled, so from 53 up to 110. Criminal exploitation wasn't far behind, with 21% of potential victims indicated as minors. If we look at all minors that were indicated, 43% were in sexual exploitation, which is a huge proportion. In 2023, Labour exploitation was where we saw the most minors. So that's quite a change. The most common age bracket overall was 13 to 15-year-olds, which is a change from the year before when it was 16 to 17, so getting younger. If we look at different exploitation types, though, this changes slightly. So 13 to 15 was only the most common in sexual exploitation, whereas 16 to 17-year-olds were more common across labour exploitation and criminal exploitation, and equal numbers of both those age brackets were reported in domestic servitude. Where we knew the gender, 57% of child victims were reportedly female, which is a slight increase from 52% the year before. The year before that, it was equal numbers, so the proportion of girls is growing. The most prominent nationality indicated amongst minors was Vietnamese, so 21% where nationality was known. That was followed by Indian minors, and then identical numbers from China, Nigeria, and Scotland. We infrequently see potential exploiters that are under 18. So in 2024, 6 were indicated, which is a low number, but twice the number that was reported the year before. And they were indicated in equal numbers in criminal and labour exploitation. And where we had specifics around their age brackets, they were 16 to 17-year-olds. So looking at child victims, the most common recruitment method was through a familial relationship. Just over a quarter of potential victims recruited that way. And that was closely followed by abduction, 25%, and false promises or statements, 23%. So where we had information on control methods, confinement and restricted movement was reported the most. So that was in relation to 60% of child victims. Sexual abuse as a control method was the second most common, and that's reported disproportionately with minors. So that's reported in relation to 51%. As well as modern slavery, we also get a lot of reports of labour abuse. So these are situations that demonstrate worker rights abuses, but without the level of control that's characteristic of modern slavery. So these cases, they rose significantly, with cases rising from 54% and potential victims by 50%, reaching peaks of nearly 800 cases and more than 2,700 potential victims. The most common indicators in these situations were non-compliance with national minimum wage in 60% of cases, 60% of potential victims. And other common features were long or excessive working hours and harassment, intimidation, or bullying. So similarly to labour exploitation, the greatest prevalence of labour abuse was reported in the care sector. So where nearly half of potential victims were indicated. So that's more than 1,200, which is a 115% increase on the year before, which is very interesting if we're seeing that the number in labour exploitation has reduced. This has impacted the nationalities indicated in labour abuse, so Indian potential victims now comprising 32% where nationality was known. After the care sector, the next most concerning sector for labour abuse was hospitality. So again, large increases of 59% in cases and 80% increase in potential victims. And there was also notable increases in retail, so 100% increase, 73% increase in janitorial and cleaning services, and 42% increase in construction cases. So at the beginning of 2024, we were already feeling the impact of the Nationality and Borders Act, the Illegal Migration Act, and rhetoric deliberately conflating smuggling and immigration with trafficking. In 2024, we also had the Safety of Rwanda Act, which worsened an already hostile political environment for those with irregular status. So this made it harder for many potential victims of modern slavery to report their situations for fear of detention or deportation. So we've seen a bit of a plateau in terms of the number of modern slavery potential victims following a decline the last year. Prior to these pieces of legislation, we were seeing annual increases. One of the biggest trends in 2024 was that female potential victims became more prevalent than males for the first time. So certain forms of modern slavery, such as sexual exploitation and domestic servitude, have always been experienced more by women. However, historically high numbers of males in labour exploitation meant that they were indicated more. So as we're seeing more and more women in exploitation in things like the care sector, that's tipped the scale, and now helpline data shows that women and girls are disproportionately affected. Not only that, but research from the IOM shows that on average, women and girls wait longer than males for NRM decisions. And when they finally get those decisions, they're more likely to be negative. So their access to support is limited and they're at risk of being re-exploited. An area where we see a lot of women exploited is the care sector. So we did see a drop in cases following that legislation in March. And there's further rules that have been introduced this month, meaning that care providers in England must evidence trying to recruit locally before internationally. And we may see the impact of that over the coming year. However, changes like these reduce the number of people exploited in this sector by reducing immigration instead of addressing the failing in the visa system, inadequate sanctions on exploiters, and insufficient protections for those at risk and trapped in dire situations. So what we're seeing now is this pattern is spreading into other sectors where migrants on skilled worker visas are exploited. So sectors like hospitality, for example. We're continuing to see cases of organ harvesting and forced surrogacy reported. Organ harvesting is where people are forced or tricked into organ removal, often with the false promise of a cash payment. And forced surrogacy, yet another way women and girls can be exploited, is where somebody is forced to carry a pregnancy as a surrogate. So these are relatively new to the helpline, with organ harvesting first reported in 2022 and forced surrogacy in 2023. So we're seeing very small numbers in these areas, but we are still getting reports. So there needs to be more discussion and more training on these lesser known forms so they can be readily identified and prevented. And forced scamming, so a type of criminal exploitation first reported to us in 2022. Whilst still in small numbers, the cases have gone up slightly each year. And as AI develops and online criminality becomes more sophisticated, we may well see this continue to grow. That is it from me. Thank you for listening. I will now hand you over to Chief Constable Sarah Crew.
Thank you, Natasha, and good afternoon, I think, everyone now. It's a privilege to join you today at the launch of the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline Annual Assessment Report. So as a Chief Constable and as co-chair of the South West Anti-Slavery Partnership, I've seen firsthand the critical role that the helpline plays in tackling what is a complex crime. So modern slavery, just struggling a little bit with my presentation. I will carry on without the slides, I think. So sorry about that, everyone. I think I've got it right now. Modern slavery is not just a hidden crime. It's happening, as we've heard, in our communities, and it's happening actually in plain sight, but it's often hidden through fear, through control, through manipulation, and through coercion. And that's why partnerships like the South West Anti-Slavery Partnership and resources like the helpline are essential in bridging those gaps. The helpline acts as an independent conduit between survivors, the public, and statutory agencies like the police. And for law enforcement, that's absolutely invaluable because we know that many victims are too frightened or too mistrustful to approach us directly. Now, what the helpline does is it offers a confidential route for concerns to be raised by survivors themselves or by members of the public who have those concerns, people who otherwise might remain silent. And what those referrals do, they contain often vital intelligence, enabling us to respond, to safeguard individuals and to disrupt criminal networks. But the independence of the helpline, it also helps by giving that bridge, it helps to build trust where we might struggle to build that trust initially. Now, not every survivor is going to be ready to engage with the police or statutory services, I've said. So the helpline is a really important alternative, a place where people can begin their journey to safety and do so at their own pace. And for us as the police, actually, coming across people or concerns, knowing that there is a resource where we can signpost individuals to, even if they're not ready to speak to us, is incredibly important. And it means that no door is ever closed and there's always a path there for support. So the helpline isn't just for the victims or the public. So it's also a crucial resource for policing professionals. Now, our officers and staff often encounter situations where the signs of modern slavery might not be clear cut. We've heard there from Natasha that we're maybe not spotting some signs in the less commonly identified areas of modern slavery. So having expert advisors available through the helpline offers reassurance and guidance and clarity, and it helps us to make the right decisions in complex and sometimes fast moving, confusing situations. So there's a shared expertise that we have there, which strengthens our collective response as a partnership. And as we've seen from the presentations we've had already, another one of the helpline's most powerful contributions is the data that it offers, and gradually over time, the trends that it's telling us about. It's transforming isolated reports that we can respond to, but also into meaningful patterns where strategically we can approach the problem. Now, that intelligence helps us not only at the national level. From my own experience, it helps us regionally as well. If I give an example of the Southwest, where intelligence through the helpline has highlighted an increase in reports of labour exploitation in the agricultural sector here across the Southwest, has led to enhanced multi-agency visits to farms during the harvesting season, ensuring that workers were safeguarded, exploitation identified, and those responsible held to account as well. So without those insights from the helpline, those patterns may have remained hidden. This is also a prime example of how the data that the helpline presents translates into real world action, enabling us to be proactive and to be strategic about how we target our limited resources and not just reactive. So in closing and summing it up, the helpline makes the invisible visible. It's a crucial partner in policing and law enforcement in society's fight against modern slavery, ensuring that we never work in isolation. I want to give a big thank you to the helpline, but also to Unseen running and setting up the helpline for your tireless work and for continuing to bridge these essential gaps. I think together we're stronger, and together we really can end exploitation. I don't want to draw too much success about how numbers have stayed fairly settled, but maybe we're getting to the point where we are preventing further worsening of the situation. Whether it's a single call that safeguards an individual or data over time that shapes a national or a regional response, I think there's huge value that we've seen here that the helpline brings to policing and to our communities, because together we're stronger and together we really can end this thing. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and also Natasha as well. I think some real insights into what the helpline has seen in the last 12 months, in 2024 in particular. But I think for me, it's just remembering that data is always a snapshot of what's happening, and the importance of data really helps us to understand immediate support needs, law enforcement activity, wider prevention strategies, but crucially understanding how we can better prevent in the first place, but also support those with lived experience helpline. So I think it's crucial to remember that our data is informative and it should be influential, and it should be helping us to really understand what it is that we can do to actually make a tangible difference. And as Sarah quite rightly said, will we ever get to that period where we actually see it start to slide away? My challenge back is, will we see that, and will we know that it's for the right reasons rather than others feeling that they can't come forward? And obviously the political and economic climate is absolutely paramount in all that. We've got a couple of minutes left. I know there are several questions that have been posed in the Q&A channel, so I'm going to hand over to Barry, who is our head of comms here at Unseen, who's going to pose a few of those questions. So over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine, and thank you, Tash and Sarah, for those really interesting presentations. And thank you all for attending and for the really interesting questions you posed in the Q&A. So we won't have time to get around to all of them now, but we will take them away, think about them, and respond by email when we send you the recording and the slides. So we had one interesting question from Amelia, and I'll hand this one over to you, Justine. Can you expand upon what a signpost is and what happens after a signpost?
Yeah, as we said, we provide so many different signposts to individuals who contact the helpline, whether that's a potential victim themselves wanting access to wider support. Quite often we have people with very complex needs, and so being able to signpost them to other services in their local area or even national networks. And sometimes we will do a kind of warm transfer. We'll hand that person off to another organisation where we think that's very beneficial. And obviously some of the key areas that we do that in are around domestic abuse or issues such as mental health, really making sure that we give access to the right services at the right time is absolutely paramount. So we will take that individual through, we will listen to what they have to say to us, what their needs are, and then we can make some suggestions about signposts. And sometimes we'll provide the individual with a number or contact details, and other times we will instigate that signpost for them. So we will actually hand them over to another organisation. So it's just knowing that we've got a plethora of different opportunities, different channels to really make sure that the wide, complex and varying needs of individuals that we do come into contact with, we can actually get them to the right place at the right time, and they can get that additional help and support.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Justine. We've run out of time, I'm afraid, so we will respond to these questions by email. Thank you. I'll hand back over to you, Justine, to conclude the meeting.
Thank you. Just to say, I'm delighted that we have seen another year in terms of the helpline. I just want to make a few final comments. I think the issue of immigration continues to remain a big barrier. So we always need to be alive to what's happening there. And as an organisation that's at the forefront of modern slavery, we are always keeping our ear to the ground and wanting to know and understand and to take forward any changes in legislation that might be coming forward to make sure that we can provide the best support that we possibly can, but not just to provide that support, to actually provide those prevention strategies and activities that really help us to get into a better place. I think also there's a changing legal landscape that we must never forget. And it is very complex, and we do continue to push forward all of our views and use our data, use our experience of working with those with lived experience to make sure that we can influence at the highest levels. And finally, I just want to say a massive thank you to the Minister for taking time to provide us with our opening address by video, to Chief Constable Sarah Crew, to all of the Unseen comms team that have spent so long getting us to this position, but most importantly to Natasha, our Head of Helpline Services, all of our helpline team who work tirelessly day in, day out, supporting people, and also our data team who have spent a good few months getting the data to this position. So thank you to all of them, without which we wouldn't have this event, and without which we wouldn't know more about modern slavery. So I'll leave it on that note. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and we will be sending out both the slides and also the video so that you do have all of that to hand if you did have any difficulties in hearing any of that. So thanks once again, and all the best. Goodbye.